Well, the first of many, the first huge family conversation between, of course, Christian and I. The point of this, or I guess the point of this first podcast, is to kind of establish what it is that we're doing. Why is it we want to kind of start doing something like this, document our beliefs and values, things that are important to us as we're sitting here. October, is it 12th,
Well,
2025, right? And plan to be doing this for, well, quite a long time to be able to delve into some important topics and issues and create a record for our family, but also potentially other people that want to come on and learn some of these issues and be able to combat some of the evil or just be prepared for things that are happening in our day. And so, to kind of as I give this brief intro into this, you kind of sparked the idea, Christian, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now, of us as a family, as hugely as immediate family, kind of coming together and doing kind of a research process, kind of learning, starting to educate ourselves, but also learn from each other, not only amongst our family, but from professionals, reading good books, potentially other research material, whether it's case studies, other types of things. I know that you're kind of putting together a good list of things, but you kind of gave us a call to arms. You kind of sent out a rally, if you will, of why we need to kind of come together and start to prepare ourselves for the war or the battle that's being waged around us, and make sure that us as important, well, as participants in the battle, are ready for anything that we could be come up against. And so I guess to kind of get us started off, what was the motivation behind, sending a text message to the family, but also then, kind of buying into to doing something like this, and now us trying to grow and expand and document and produce something that could actually be long term for ourselves, but also anybody who also thinks or believes that they can make a difference. What was the motivation behind all that?
that is a good question. I think it's going to get, over the next several years as we continue to do this project, it's really going to start to be extrapolated. Um, I think it's hard to just give you a two-sentence rundown of the things I'm feeling, thinking, foreseeing. I think that there's a lot at stake for our country, for our religion, for our family, all those plural for Western civilization. And I I think there's a lot of influence that I draw from some big, really smart people. Jordan Peterson and Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, Katie Faust, James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose. There's a number of things, and as I've gathered maybe some perspective, as being 28 over the last really 10 years since I was 18, really kind of trying to think about these really broad yet deep and complicated concepts at a thorough level. It's made me realize that one, not everyone sees things the way I do, and two, if I hold these to be really deep, critical pieces, and they're under attack by people that don't agree, that's a problem. And essentially, I think that as I've talked with people and read books and listened and seen, maybe or really kind of considered the influence that those things have had on me, I'm realizing this is a fight. It's not, this isn't a passive thing. There, if you believing or thinking that it's just one side raging against the machine, that's not, I don't think that's accurate. I think it's an active destruction for nuclear concepts that are required in order to live the good life. And I'm alarmed. And generally, I try not to be an alarmist, but I am alarmed. I'm concerned. And to add another piece to this, I want to make sure that I'm not going to be around here forever. I want to make sure that my kids' 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 kids have something that is strong and
Yeah,
the institutions are preserved, that this is a place worth living. Because to be frank, if it's not here, then it's not anywhere. So that's going to take a lot of time. I think even for me still, this is something that I don't have 40, 50 years of mastery on this. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not any of those things. I am an ordinary guy that's recognizing that some of the fundamental truths that I believe are under attack. And it's time to, one, really understand what those truths are, and two, learn how to combat the arguments against them in order to preserve those, for the next generation and generations down the road.
yeah. And I mean to your point, I guess about us not being the most experienced wise people that hopefully someday we could become. I do, the vision long term is to incorporate people like Dad into these types of discussions and maybe even have him be a foundational piece of all of this because he has lots of time and experience studying and talking and I guess well, thinking even, right? That's a
Yeah.
huge piece of this, and that's something that we've kind of discussed as an important part is that critical thinking aspect of it. But you know, uh, you would kind of put together this, I don't know what you want to call it, manifesto of some sort, or just kind of main purpose statement type of a thing. I mean, would you feel comfortable just kind of reading what it is that you wrote, and then we could kind of break down some of those ideas, or or even, I mean,
Sure.
you could even just discuss kind of some of those main points as we go. If you want to kind of break it down, you kind of decide what you think is best.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. I want to preface with something because I touched on it and you touched on it, and I think it's resonating for both of us. It's funny you mentioned Dad. Dad and I talked the other day for well over an hour about this, and I think one of the important points that we both agree on is you have to you it is critical to recognize this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which essentially is I included an actual um, like fleshed out definition, but essentially it's the idea that people who know the least claim to know the most.
Yeah,
And it's important to recognize when you are introducing yourself into something like this. Like for me, I couldn't go teach a mastery course on this like Jordan Peterson could. But I don't think that's the point. I don't think that's what I'm trying to do.
correct.
I think the point of this for me is, and I think I won't put words in your mouth, but also probably for you is this is an opportunity for people that are on this journey of finding truth, establishing it, building a hierarchy of values and starting to figure out where things intersect and where they collide and where they fit harmoniously. That's not something you have to be an expert on.
Right.
I think there are some, 101, maybe 101 building blocks that might be helpful in understanding some of these core tenets, but I don't think that's necessary. I think what you can do is just jump in and start reading some of this heavy literature and you become it becomes a skill that you
Right.
develop. So I'm not I don't buy into the we have to be experts on this. I think that misses the point. But I think it is important to have humility and realize that this is just an opportunity for people that are learning, on this journey to just to come together and talk about things. So um, I think I'll preface with that. So I don't want I just want to make that clear. That's something I've been thinking about for the last week or so is that I'm no pro. I'm
And if I
just trying to
could,
figure it out with everyone else.
yeah, if I could interject, I think my point of view, if I may add that, is that a lot of, I think what I'm trying to get out of it is I want to learn as we go because I'm an expert in 0% of it, right? But at least learning basic definitions and how kind of as you said earlier, extrapolate information and then learn how those things tie with current events and different political, social, philosophical, faith-based issues, kind of how they apply,
Totally.
I think is important. Not to say that this is a formal education system or program,
Yeah. Oh
right?
yeah.
But just a, a conversation discussion type format for us to pose ideas and then break them down in a way that's
Yep.
coherent, not only for people that might be slightly a few steps ahead in your situation to a few steps behind in mine, but be able to relate, I guess, daunting ideas in a very simple manner that's just more relatable for us as well as, our kids hopefully someday, but
Yeah.
anybody else that this possibly could reach, of course, as well. So yeah, so I totally accept, agree with, and concur with what your point is there.
One one of the things, while we're on this, and I'll give, I'm not skipping over your question. I want to come
Yeah,
back to that.
yeah,
But one thing that, Jordan Peterson has heavily influenced me on is this idea that we want to lift the heaviest weight. When we go on the hero's journey, there is a dragon to be slain.
yeah,
And that is one of the purposes of going on it. And that's really oversimplifying that. But it's important for me to keep in context that I do want to be able to read that heavy literature. I want to be able to read, Nietzsche and Kant and a lot of the stuff that is maybe anti the proponent that Foucault and I mean Jung somewhere a little not really agree or disagree, but that those are some complex ideas, and I think that in order to really do that effectively, you have to start somewhere
right,
and you start to build up this skill set that eventually allows you to get there. That is the mountain to climb. That is the heaviest weight that I can think of because that is helping us solve the mystery of life.
right,
And so, in order to do that, I think it is necessary to start building this skill set, and doing that as a team is an effective way to do it. I think. The second point, I think we ought to be very skeptical of experts in a lot of regards. Because, I mean, if you were to think, and if we're being intellectually honest, like what are you actually an expert in? If someone were to tell you, I need an expert, what would you raise your hand and say, I am an expert at that? I think my list is like one. That zone defense that I had to come up with, when we were coaching,
right,
that amoeba defense, man, I created all sorts of rules. I spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours on that. Maybe I'm an expert on that, but everything else, no chance. So maybe I'm an expert at doing my own hair. I don't know, right? But
right.
other than that, maybe some skepticism on that is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'm happy to shift directions and maybe get to answering your question now if you want,
Yeah, yes. I mean, I
or
don't
if you
have
have
to say
something to
that.
add.
If you're an
Okay.
expert in one thing, I'm definitely an expert in zero. I
I
mean,
don't know about that.
I,
Well, yeah,
I,
you see my point.
yes, absolutely. Yep.
So
But I think that this addressing this specific issue of, the true intent and purpose of this, right, is for us to be just conversational about things is hugely important.
yeah, that's
Right.
right.
And so yes, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that that was Dad's insight when you had discussed it with him. Given I can't even remember the term you used to
Dunning-Kruger effect.
the
It's
Dunning-Kruger
it's a
effect.
it's a cognitive bias essentially.
Right.
So, and I mean, we'll do plenty of time
I
on
was I was
cognitive
gonna say
biases, I'm sure.
maybe 10 or 15 years from now, after doing this for long enough, we can be an expert in a few things. But
Sure.
yeah, let's kind of dive into what it is you got.
Okay. Um, okay. Well, I think there's a number of you're essentially asking my background and how this has really prompted it. In undergrad, well, growing up, it starts really early. I remember when Dad used to talk to us about the fox and the wolf,
Yeah.
and he would ask us. Do you remember what he asked us at the end every single time? What is the moral?
Yeah. What? Yeah.
What's the moral of the story? What is the truth that you need to pull out of this in order to live a good life? And I think that's key. Dad instilled in me and all of us, and Mom's the same way. I'm not using, at
Right.
benefit one at the expense of the other. They complement each other very well. But you have to extrapolate or pull out the principle and learn how to apply it on a continuum. And so that is something that stuck with me for a long time. So when I got into undergrad, I was like, yeah, instead, I was like, let's do math, let's do finance. And then I was like, no, that is not what resonates with me. That stuff is very important, and we'll come to that. But
Right.
that is not the abstract framework that allows us to really to get a sense, to get perspective on where we are and what our purpose is. The math plays a different role. Um, But so when I got into undergrad, I made that shift. I was like, I'm going to study political theory. I'm going to study morality, philosophy. Then they're all very similar. I think they get used interchangeably. They're different, but I got into undergrad and I hopped in and I started reading this book about Greece, and it was the about the Peloponnesian War.
Sure.
I think it was by Thucydides, and I left that class being like, "What in the world is going on?" I was
Sure.
like, "This is not the stuff I grew up learning." So a lot of people, I have a lot of empathy for people that are like, "This is overwhelming." But what that did to me is I started as I finished that course and took another one and took another one and took another one. I took every political theory and philosophy course that Utah State Eastern offered. I took all of them because I was like, this is neat. And so by the end of that, I started to really think like, oh, this is important. And so I decided to change my major. I transferred over to BYU and I studied heavily in philosophy and a lot of math too. But that's kind of what my background's in is I think philosophy just general as a general concept and math or statistics fit well together because they give you two different ways to maybe evaluate the world and your surroundings. So
Well,
I
can I
think that's
pause
part
real
of it.
quick? Because you've used it
Yeah.
a few times, but even you had mentioned that a lot of people kind of lump some of these words together, like philosophy
Yeah.
and some of the other words. What does philosophy mean? I mean, if you could
So,
define that briefly for us in general terms, what does that actually entail and imply?
um, I put some thoughts together, that I drafted, and I think the best way to maybe give you just a bite size or a sound bite
Sure.
is that it's the broad discipline that's concerned with existence, it's concerned with understanding, it's concerned with morality, it's concerned with I mean the purpose a lot of these it really it's the purpose of life, it's the purpose of
Okay.
what the existence. So that is, and if we were to paint a Venn diagram, I'll introduce some other concepts because I think it helps kind of explain this. Philosophy is the big circle out here. And within philosophy, you have some important pieces. You have epistemology, axiology, and ontology. So
And in
those
philosophy
all,
kind of unifies or all of those things kind of
yes,
fit within or touch in some way philosophy, but they're kind of separate sectors, if you will, in some sense of philosophy as a whole.
yes. So when we're talking about philosophy, it incorporates all three of those things. Those have their own sections,
Sure.
subcircles, and they overlap a little bit. But on the outside, this is philosophy that's swallowing or eating the whole thing up.
Yeah.
If
Okay.
you're talking about, so one, a logical way to think about it is if you're talking about axiology, you're talking about philosophy.
Sure.
If you're talking about ontology, you're talking about philosophy. But if you're talking about philosophy, generally, you might not be talking about each one of those three things. You might be siloed into one of the three at a time. Does
Square
that
is
make
a
sense?
rectangle, but a rectangle isn't a square.
Yes, that is a logical. That's an argument of logic.
I see.
So we'll spend plenty of time on that too.
Right.
That
Yeah,
is a lawyer's favorite game.
totally.
um, so
Continue. I cut you off. Sorry.
no, you're fine. So I think that's important. So axiology, um, essentially is what's dealing with the study of value of what do people value. It's asking questions like what is good, what is right, what is beautiful, things like that. So it's trying to really get to the heart of what people value and why. Ontology is a little bit different. That's being, like the study of being and existence, like the metaphysical
Right.
side. And then epistemology really cuts right to the heart of knowledge. What do you know? How do you know it? How can you prove that you know it? Is this something, that's divinely given to us? Can you discover it? Can you prove it? Those are so I think you can see like we're talking about very abstract concepts, but they're
Right.
distinct.
Right.
So I think that's important. And that, I mean, as you can tell, this is my fundamental
Yeah,
understanding or baseline understanding of what it is. So we'll flesh that out in a long
absolutely.
time, but hopefully that at least philosophy is broad. It's
Yes.
really broad.
That's
Okay.
great, I think. kind of coming back to your point though, philosophy and the finance that you had kind of gone into, I guess what was, kind of what were you where were you going with that a little bit?
So I was just trying to tell you a little bit about my
Yeah,
background, but I switched from finance in when I transferred to BYU into study political science
right.
rather than philosophy. But political science for me was like 70% philosophy and 30% statistics. That's really what it boiled down to. And a little bit of maybe politics, political theory in there as
Right.
well. So that's a little bit of my background. I mean, I'm in law school, third year, first semester law school. It's different, and I appreciate that I took that background. I think it is a nice prep for law. So I mean, we have all sorts of things that are influencing just the way we live and the way our country's structured.
Right.
We have philosophy at the heart of it, and then that influences the law, and the law has a direct influence on what we do. So these are interconnected pieces that, if you don't think about these often, it can just kind of be a jumbled mess. So, and maybe it is even if you do think about it, but I think that's a little bit of my background. I know you're trying to flesh out of me, why did what is this thing I wrote? What's the emotion that's going on there? Go ahead.
No, no, I guess what as we're sitting here kind of talking and to be fully transparent, we're not really following what it is that we had written down here. And I think
Nope, we're
that's
not.
that's the purpose, right? Is kind of to
Yeah.
to see what happens and then see where it goes. But there's a point that you made to me the when I first called you about doing this, and it's something that I've since repeated multiple times to multiple different people that I've either wanted to have kind of be part of the podcast with us or in some sense inspire a little bit of action from someone else. And I kind of want to, I would, I guess this is something I want you to talk or at least maybe give me a little bit more insight as to why you said this or think this or whatnot. But you said, um, um, I can't afford not to, right? And
Yeah.
I truly, I mean, I think that could be something that a lot of people overlook because everybody can make an excuse to not do anything. But the same thing that could be an excuse could also be a reason, right? And I think that's kind of where at least you and I are coming from in some senses. The original intent and purpose is not only for us to learn, but also to create something for our kids. Um, and if we don't do it now, who's going to do it? Or it might never get done, or we might never, take action. But why did you say that? Or why is that something that came to mind? Because I assume you've probably used that a handful of other times with other people that you've kind of talked to about a lot of this, the action, the call to arms that you've kind of given. But what do you really mean by we can't afford not to?
I think what I'm asking you to do when I sent that to you, specifically to when I sent that to the siblings and the spouses originally, I was asking you to really consider your priorities. I'm asking you to be intellectually honest.
Yeah,
I'm asking you to make hard decisions and do some introspection because really what I foresee is something that's been happening for a long time. It's been happening since at least the 50s the 60s. There is this movement, postmodernism movement, that is going through and destroying or trying to destroy institutions that are critical to preserve our nation, our culture, our societal influence, the way we understand families, religion, etc. And so really what I'm saying without getting granular, because I think that might have been overwhelming, is I'm saying really consider the things that you value. And if there's a fight going on against the things that you value in the way that you live your life, what other worthy cause should you be prioritizing over this? And I don't know, I don't think that that's a very deep way of cutting at this because I think you have to build up why all of those are important.
right.
But I think that's an individual assessment that must be made using critical thinking, which we should talk about.
Yeah,
But you have to decide what is it that I value, why, And what am I willing to do to protect and preserve that? Because if, and this is, it's going to slide us into some other things. If you are a person that just values pleasure, if you are hedonistic and your only pursuit is to feel some kind of pleasure, you are not going to value a lot of the things that I value
Sure.
because I am building stability, or I want to preserve stability. I want order. I want a strong value structure that is going to provide for many other people. As dad would say, I want to be a giver more than a taker. I want to be a builder. And I think that there's something inherent about that speaks to me. It's this, there's a lot of voices going on, right? And there's one voice that makes me sound crazy. There's a lot of voices all over the place. And there's one in my head that keeps telling me that that inaction is going to accelerate the decline.
Sure.
So it is required of me, and these I think these words have really particular meaning. I feel that I have a duty, an obligation, a requirement, a responsibility, that I will be called to account for my behavior down here. And one of the things that I will be judged on is whether I did enough to help preserve the good with a capital G and the truth.
Right.
And I think that resonates with a lot of people because they either feel similarly or have felt similarly, but we just don't really know what to do because we're not fighting a war of swords and shields. We're fighting a war of culture, emotion, and ideology. And it's really hard when it's that abstract. So that is really the core of what was motivating me. I was trying to see where you stood, and
Yeah,
if you stood with me, it's time to act.
absolutely. And you said you've mentioned this word a few times, and I want to make sure that we're clear about what it is that you're referring to. You say institutions. Now, the common folk like myself are going to be like, why are you talking about companies? Why are you talking about,
Right.
business? Why are you talking about, government, right? What do you mean by institution? Because you've now mentioned that a few times. What explicitly is that are you referring to?
So institution is something that I think has a number of meanings. I
Sure.
think it could be, the literal meaning is, like as you suggested, just corporate America, maybe generally. What
Sure.
about the universities? Those are institutions. The government itself could be considered an institution.
Right.
The court system is probably an institution. The family, marriage, even that granular, are institutions. So I think it's broad. And, we would have to really nail down, and maybe that's something we could work on, is nailing down this pattern. Where do we see this pattern of institution? Or let me phrase that differently. We use that word a lot. So what are some of the common themes that maybe fall under that umbrella? Common
Sure.
patterns under that umbrella.
Kind of break it down
That
from
that
there.
is yeah, and break it or do the best we can, at least
Sure.
identify some of the patterns. But I think it's broad. And when I use it, I'm talking about four fundamental things that are required in order to one, be a free civilization, to be able to exercise your religion as your conscience sees fit, and three, to live the good life. And that is something that's going to take a lot of working on and fleshing out. And it's probably going to look differently for you and me. But at the core of that is being able to have the freedom to be able to pursue that. So I think that I think it's broad, but it makes sense. It's these core pillars that really uphold our country.
Right.
So
And I guess kind of maybe the closing thought. I appreciate you kind of clarifying some of these things as we've gone, but is you had mentioned critical thinking because that's a I think a core focus of what it is that we're trying to achieve as we begin to critical think about a lot of these things, which you've been doing for a long time. And I would say most people have tried or have made it, maybe made some form of effort to try and critical think, but maybe it's important for us to kind of delve into more maybe what it is we're doing behind the scenes to actually do that, or what we're
sure.
encouraging maybe other people to do if they decide to kind of come on this journey with us of, of defending the institutions that we hold dear and whatnot. So I guess kind of expound on critical thinking and what it is your thoughts are on that. Too many to count.
Critical. Well, it's it's hard.
Critically
I
think
I
about critical thinking, huh?
well, yeah, that is something you have
Right.
to do, and it's kind of it's a little bit circular maybe. We I think the word, be a critical thinker. I see that everywhere I go.
Sure.
It's a platitude, which is it's something that people say that essentially has no meaning anymore because we're unserious or we're lazy about talking about that. But let's think, let's actually analyze. We're going to use our critical thinking skills to
Yeah.
talk about what critical thinking is. It's a little circular, I get that. Critical thinking as opposed to being an emotional, biased, patterned, ideological, maybe decision maker. That's bad. And the reason that that's bad is because if you are just going off of impulse, generally I think is, I mean, from what I understand, and it's not much, but as human beings, we tend to react to the impulses that make us feel good. And if we're going to be feel good decision makers, that's a problem. That's a problem because it doesn't consider all the people around us and it doesn't consider the people looking forward. There's no clairvoyance, there's no foresight when you use that as your base or as your decision-making process. So, what we ought to be doing, and I think that I see it all the time in my own life, is we ought to be conceptualizing and making decisions based on analysis, based on evaluation, based on rational thinking and reasoning. And I think that that's this it requires that we just go a few steps deeper. So I think reasoning is at the heart of this. But what does it mean to reason when you're making decisions? Well, it's the exact opposite of what I was just describing a minute ago. You're not using your emotion, your bias or biases. You're not using your ideological alignment. You're actually considering concepts based on their merit. And when things have merit, you pursue them. So there's a lot to really unpack here. Again, I mean, we know this. We could spend a whole day really thinking about that, but
Totally.
I think that to sum it up, it's you have to have some type of objective determinate or like criteria for making decisions. And using reasoning is one way that we get there. Even if we disagree on things, we're going to bring up the strongest points and we're going to make decisions based on those, which puts us head and shoulders above what emotional, irrational decision making does. So I think that what we need to start taking that concept seriously again because we talk about it a lot. I mean, I see it in my school all the time. We have to think critically about this. Do you mean critically like I should have my own independent analysis and use my reasoning, or do you think I should just disagree, agree with you because you disagree with the mainstream? What are
Right.
we actually talking about?
Right.
So
Which was your
that's where
point
I think
earlier with experts, right? Is that,
yes.
it's not it's more about kind of drilling down to what the truth is about a matter and deciphering it for oneself, not just accepting, someone being an expert for their title, but actually, learning, I guess studying the footnotes in a lot of senses maybe is a good way of putting
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I think that's a good metaphor. I think it's important because, as you suggested, if we just follow the people that are experts, decision makers based on title, that actually, I mean, we'll get into this, but it might actually be illogical to
Sure.
do that because you're not actually evaluating the substance. You're evaluating the person that claims to be the authority figure. So
Right.
that's one of the reasons I know we're a little over time, but that's one of the reasons this is where the math comes in. The math does a nice job quantifying rather than qualifying. We're talking, the qualitative side is a little more of the storytelling. It's a little more anecdotal. Whereas the math is let's look at the numbers. Let's combine all of those anecdotes turn it into averages, or whatever kind of metric you want to use, so that we can have some insight into how we make decisions moving forward based on what we've previously observed. That is reasoning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And I mean, as you kind of pointed out, is we could go on for quite a long time just talking about these things and not even delving into all of the particular vocabulary and words that we use. And maybe we just kind of say, we'll pick up kind of where we left off next week. The goal, of course, being that we try to do this on a weekly basis, try to get on and have a 30-minute conversation, and then kind of as we go, dive into some of these deeper topics, kind of key concepts. You've created a great list, and I look forward to kind of talking about that with you. Um, but with that, I think it's been a great conversation. I look forward to doing it again next week, and we'll kind of come up with some other things to kind of continue the dialogue, continue to go from here, and hopefully we can continue to have great
yeah.
in generalized but also in-depth discussion about some of these things. So talked
Can I make can I make one more plug
yeah,
real
please go
quick?
ahead.
I think, yeah, you brought up the concept list and the book list previously. I think my, limited advice is to people, if you are not sure where to begin, find some kind of 101 building block. Maybe that'll help you. But the other thing is just dive in.
Yeah,
Dive in. And the challenge really is, how can you afford not to?
yeah,
If not now, then when? How are you going to justify when you're going to do this? So I like that this has been your idea to put this together, combining it with reading the book, the literature. So I think that this is something that can be a valuable tool, and hopefully we can, turn it into something that other people can model and
yeah,
really adopt into their own families is one of my incentives. So thanks for doing this.
you bet. Till next week.